Without the fourth natural disaster, I had to introduce myself. www.zhaozuiyuan.com, dark blue plus points plus game background. As an internal player, Anwen went through the holographic game abyss. Faced with the ravages of natural disasters, the coveting of abyssal demons, and the dark clouds of war in the Empire, power is Anwen's only way out. Fortunately, Anwen has a game panel where killing monsters can earn soul level upgrades. And when the public beta is launched, the main https://www.zhaozuiyuan.com. Chapter 1. Natural Disasters. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Under the darkness. Flames, blood, burning flags. A town amidst war. The city is broken. The garrison soldiers shouted loudly, and he fought hard to chop and smash the skeleton soldiers holding agricultural tools. Half a day ago, that was still a gentle-faced leader. Behind that skeleton lies a vast army of undead spirits. The faces of the defending soldiers showed a look of despair. Hundreds or even thousands of skeleton soldiers and zombies besieged this small town on the western border. Suddenly, a knight spear was shot down with a loud roar. The spear swept across, and several skeleton soldiers flew out, shattering into pieces upon landing. "Captain Andre!" exclaimed the guard in surprise. "Follow me. Break through." Andre rode his horse forward with a resolute face, holding a young man in his arms. With a flick of his spear, several knights in full armor followed behind, cleaning up the surrounding undead. "Be sure to protect Lord Anwen." Amidst the noisy noise, Anwen woke up on his horse's back. It hurt so much. Anwen's face showed a bitter expression, feeling as if his body was hurting everywhere. He opened his eyes slightly, feeling his body surrounded by thick armor, and a tight sense of security still lingered. The scenery on both sides quickly receded, and the person holding him was waving a long spear, constantly shattering the spirits trapped by Tiaofei. The purple and gold floral decoration is clearly visible on the knight's armor. A familiar pattern. What is this? Drake's coat of arms. In a daze, Anwen seemed to have returned to the beta of the game Abyss. In the holographic game setting, the first plot of the novice town was to break through from the siege of a plague of undead spirits. No, this is not a game. There is flesh and blood, there is substance, and he can feel blood flowing inside his body, his heart beating violently. I have traveled through time. Anwen gradually realized this. This is not a good thing. Even if he is a beta high player, he managed to achieve perfect reviews for the main storyline and 12 side storylines of the first expansion film in just 1 month. But this is not a game, and life only comes once. Panel. Watching the besieged spirits, Anwen habitually silently recited in his heart. Anwen Drake, normal template, level 1, health. 41 out of 100, stamina. 8, agility. 9, spirit. 11, charm. 21, cold crow swordsmanship. Beginner level 17/50ths, cold crow breathing method. Beginner level 2950, basic archery. Beginner 14/50, status. Minor injury, soul point. 0, and Drake. Bad news. This is a nobleman in the opening CG of the Undead Scourge plot who refuses to leave his territory, falls off the city wall in a melee, and dies a miserable life. Good news. You can call out the game panel. Things seem to have returned to a familiar direction. Anwen, who was gradually understanding the situation, no longer had any silent thoughts. This is on the battlefield. It's nothing more than transitioning from an open world of self-defined roles to role-playing. I'm familiar with both. Anwen calmed down and mobilized all his strength, squeezing out a sentence from his mouth. Break through towards the main road. Originally, such a low murmur would not be heard by anyone, but after all, Andre is a knight of the Starlight class and his hearing is amazing. His body trembled first, and then he exclaimed with surprise, "Lord Anwen. You're okay." Then suddenly realizing what the other person was saying, he frowned and said, "There will be reinforcements from the undead on the road. Sir, that's not a good place to go." At present, nearly 1,000 undead spirits were gathered in front of him. Even though Andre's face remained calm, he knew in his heart that if he could not break through in a short period of time, even he would have to drink his hatred. If there are reinforcements on the main road, rushing over will be a dead end. Follow my orders. Anwen has no time to explain now. This is not a typical undead disaster, but a sacrificial ritual triggered by the chaos cult to open the door to the abyss. Those undead are controlled and besieged by the living in their territories and villages. On the main road, there are actually very few scattered soldiers wandering uncontrollably. Drake Knights. Break through towards the main road. Andre is the loyal guardian knight of Viscount Anwen, who was personally arranged by his father, Count Torin Drake, to guard. Anwen's orders, even if sent to death, must be obeyed. A group of 7 knights, along with several soldiers guarding the territory, followed suit and headed towards the main road to kill. They are not fond of war, they just break through. At a distance of several hundred meters, under the leadership of Andre, they collided with layers of undead soldiers and passed by in a flash. Suddenly, the view ahead widened. The undead have been left behind. Knights, we have stepped onto the main road. Really? There's nothing left. Andre had a surprised expression on his face. Based on his judgment, the undead army that was supposed to support him was nowhere to be seen. There were only undead soldiers besieging the territory here, without any reinforcements. It's not just us Drake who are surrounded, even if all the villagers in the western wilderness are transformed into undead, it's not enough to continuously besiege all the territories. Anwen coughed, and the fall was too heavy. Even if there was no bone fracture, it was unbearable bruises all over his body. Your Highness is wise, Andre nodded in agreement. Compared to Count Torin, who only knows how to use force, his son was already much smarter, otherwise he would not have been elected as a border lord by the noble council. Walk towards Maple Leaf Castle. Anwen continued to command. Andre's spirit shook and he agreed, I will comply. He rode his horse forward, looking for Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. With 6 knights and 7 garrison soldiers breaking through, he quickly advanced towards the direction of Maple Leaf Castle. Maple Leaf Castle is the central city in the western region. This is the territory of Count Bowles. One of the important purposes of the Scourge of the Dead is to sacrifice this city. In the first beta expansion, this city withstood 5 waves of attacks from the undead army, even waiting for the Holy See's Order of Glory, but ultimately fell. Sin lies not in war, but in the inner demons. Only by arriving here can Anwen obtain a stable development environment. At least in the early stages of the plot, the defense of Maple Leaf Castle is sufficient to resist the natural disasters of the undead. After walking for half an hour, the number of undead beings around sharply decreased, with only scattered skeleton soldiers wandering aimlessly on both sides of the avenue. Captain Andre, the knight behind him reminded and called out to Andre, who was still riding on horseback. Looking back at the knights and guards who had broken through, Andre frowned and pondered. After a moment, he ordered, everyone stop. Rest on the spot. Breaking out of their own territory, the knights and guards were both exhausted. If you don't rest any longer, there will be falling behind in the garrison. Mark, go clean up the surrounding undead. Mark, who was in the best condition within the cavaliers, remained silent. He drew his long sword from his waist and walked towards the nearby skeleton soldier without saying a word. Wait, Anwen said weakly in his mouth. His gaze turned to Andre and he said, give me your sword. Andre's face changed and he said, Sir, you're injured. Don't make me repeat it again, Andre. The young man's gaze was firm, and he extended his right hand to the old knight, speaking in a low yet unquestionable voice. Chapter 2. Experiments. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Roll, jump, and release skills. This is the gameplay of hardcore games during the keyboard and mouse era. In the holographic era, the judgment of the battle situation and a certain level of fighting skills became the standard equipment for high gameplay. This is the era of physical feedback, where players are skilled in games and often have high levels of combat skills in reality. Anwen is not a frail playhouse. Even in reality, he can deal with 3 or fewer strong men without changing his face. Waving the blue boutique knight sword handed over by Andre, a familiar grip sensation arose. It feels like a game. In the game Abyss, weapons are divided into 5 levels. Whiteboard, blue spirit, green soul, purple gold, and dark gold. Having blue boutique weapons in the early stages is what many players dream of. Knight's long sword boutique, attack power. 21, feature. Sharp and sharp, it's unbelievable that you can still see the equipment attributes. Anwen sighed in his heart, holding a long sword and following the footsteps of his soul. The two of them rushed towards the skeleton and walking corpse not far from the roadside. After a brief rest, although Anwen's health did not recover, he also gained some strength. Choosing to clean up the surroundings is not about showing any bravery in front of the knights. They are all knights who have sworn allegiance to him. Even if Anwen has no strength in his hands, these people must listen to him. Soul value. Anwen's gaze was fixed on the skeleton soldier, and his body suddenly thrust towards the opponent. The farming tools in the hands of the skeleton soldiers are not a threat. Anwen easily dodged the slow attack on his side, then a silver light flashed and his long sword was swung. The skull soldiers on the front were beheaded. Obtained 10 soul points, and when let out a muffled groan, his movement slightly increased, causing his body pain to intensify. But the feedback of 10 soul points left him mentally shaken. That's it. It's the feeling of this kind of game. Soul value can be used to upgrade attribute points. Every 1 point increase in attribute points is equivalent to a level up. To increase the attribute point by 1 initially, 100 soul points are required, and then gradually increase. If that's the case, upgrading is not difficult. Anwen looked at the zombies and skeletons surrounding the road and clenched his long sword in his hand. Not far away, Andre's gaze was fixed on Anwen, and the knight's spear in his hand was slightly raised. He is truly the only son of Count Torin, praised the knight beside him. Even if he is injured, he can fight the undead alone. Lord Anwen did not gather his soul fire, Andre responded indifferently. Even Lord Torin may not have the fighting will of Lord Anwen under the same conditions. Recalling his old master, Andre did not belittle or exaggerate it, but objectively evaluated it. Count Torin fought bravely, but relied entirely on his own force. He fought with ease, but against the wind, he persevered for a while. I thought following Lord Anwen was meant to be assigned, but now it seems like it's not bad either, the knight laughed. Everyone likes lords who are brave and wise. Although Anwen was young, he relied on his guidance to break through the encirclement. Now, despite being injured, he can still fight against the undead, which is enough to demonstrate his military strength. Andre cannot deny this evaluation, but he also feels a bit strange. Although Anwen's evaluation of the Southern Territory includes intelligence, he rarely engages in knightly training. But now they can directly face the dead, even with skillful movements. Is this still the legitimate son who was praised as the decline of the Drake family? The knight was puzzled in his heart. With continuous battles, Anwen also regained the feeling in the game. He strolled through the siege of skeleton soldiers and zombies, easily avoiding attacks and using his long sword to counterattack. Almost every time, it can accurately crush the weaknesses of the skeleton soldiers and zombies. The head with the underworld fire. The soul value is constantly refreshing. Obtain 15 soul points, obtain 11 soul points, obtain 16 soul points, killing more than 10 undead souls in a row. Anwen felt a shock in his body, and a warm current flowed through his entire body from bottom to top. Han Crow Swordsmanship. Mastering 2 out of 100, Soul. 117 points, can be upgraded. Proficiency can also be improved during battles, with Anwen exhaling and the knight's long sword becoming more compatible, making it easier to kill undead creatures. In just over 10 minutes, all the undead spirits around were cleared away. This was originally Mark's mission, but it was all fulfilled by Anwen, who was eager to kill him. The original soul value has also reached 730 points. Anwen walked back to Andre's side without returning the long sword, and Andre seemed to recognize Anwen's strength and looked at him with contentment. "Let's go." The old knight stood up and brought a warhorse to Anwen, just as he had done to Count Torin before. After the team rested, they set off again. Anwen rode on the horse, took a deep breath, and added soul points to his stamina. Stamina. 8 plus 4, health. 103 out of 150, not only has life regained some, but there is also a noticeable feeling of physical strength. Anwen shook his palm and felt a surge of strength, which was more than 50% of the increase in strength. The feedback from his body was still very obvious. The upgrade system in Abyss is very complex. There are template upgrades, character upgrades, and career upgrades. The template system is divided into 5 categories: ordinary, elite, epic, legendary, hero, etc. The improvement of each template will bring significant growth to oneself. In the early stages, players are also regular templates. After obtaining the knight profession, there is a certain probability of upgrading to an elite template. However, this also depends on the basic attributes. Anwen, who has participated in the beta, has speculated that it should be related to the initial attribute's roll point. My initial stamina is 8, and when transferring at level 10, I can definitely exceed 15 points, which is the minimum attribute requirement for using the knight profession to achieve the elite template. If the initial stamina attribute is less than 5 points, then the knight profession obtained at level 10 cannot generate a promotion template. Anwen silently calculated the allocation of attributes in his mind, adding 9 attribute points will take him to level 10, of which 7 points need to be given to his stamina. This at least meets the requirements of ordinary knight profession templates for promoting elites. However, Anwen still wants more. The Holy Sea's glorious knight class, Anwen silently recited. This class is a special class, and in the beta test, only 2 players have met the conditions for template promotion. The Radiant Knight not only possesses the power of a knight, but also has the ability to use papal magic. In the early stages, there were war machines that could both milk and resist, and in the future, advanced professions such as Judgment Knight and Heavenly Punishment Knight could be transferred. It can be said that it is the ceiling of career templates in the early stages of the game. At that time, both players' physical fitness was above 15 points, but more importantly, their spirit was also above 12 points and their charm was above 10 points. Anwen's initial attributes are much higher than those of players, and the total of the 4 initial attributes of players will not exceed 40 points. Looking for Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com, Anwen has a total of 49 points. Although most of them lack combat power and charm, it is not so difficult to obtain the same attributes as the 2 players who switched to the Guanghui Knight profession at that time. Charm itself meets the standard, except for adding 1 point to the spirit, and even leaving 1 attribute point for agility. The western region is ravaged by natural disasters, and the dead are also starting to attack the city. But Maple Leaf Castle is not the only place where people can survive, however, it is the only place where they can obtain the Glory Knight profession in the early stages of the main storyline. If it weren't for this, Anwen would just cross the forest and escape to his father, Count Torin's territory. Why bother with this effort? For the indigenous people, it may be difficult to navigate through the forest, but for Anwen, who has vomited while brushing monsters, it is just a small forest that can be easily climbed before changing jobs. With the escort of a knight captain like Andre, it would be even simpler. However, the scourge of the undead was just an appetizer to the initial plot. This disaster, which began in the west and swept across the entire Orson Empire, ultimately caused a sharp decline of 30% in the empire's population, leaving most civilian families empty. It also provides sufficient development time for subsequent abyssal invasions. Anwen only wants to live well and does not want to waste his hard-earned second life. Faced with such a world background, it is impossible to achieve this without sufficient strength. Closing the panel, Anwen rubbed his brow. At the current speed, they can reach Maple Leaf Castle through the main road within 3 days, and the first undead attack will also impact here in 5 days. The garrison of Maple Leaf Castle will hold off here for a week, waiting for reinforcements from the Vatican. There aren't enough wandering spirits along the way, let's see if we can meet the initial branch line tomorrow. Anwen looked ahead with a hint of anticipation. Chapter 3. Branch Lines. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the afternoon. The beautiful sunshine in the western region and the stagnant atmosphere on the ground create a sharp contrast, which makes people feel uncomfortable. Fortunately, Mark, who was at the forefront, had rich experience and was not affected by the surrounding scenery. He looked ahead with both eyes and a solemn expression, constantly searching for the wandering spirits. Undead natural disasters may cause damage, but in reality, they are not significant. Civilians are not fools. They understand the principle of seeking benefits and avoiding harm. Before disasters spread, most of them had already fled. Those who have no time to leave will be transformed into low-level undead creatures by the plague of the undead. Even if a natural disaster takes shape, the main force that truly attacks the city is not these initial undead spirits that have been temporarily transformed from civilians and have not yet settled deeply. But in the ancient tombs of the Western realm, those undead souls who do not know how long they have slept. Anwen naturally has a way to deal with these undead spirits. However, in the short term, obtaining soul points is even more important. From dawn until the afternoon of the next day, Anwen trained with the wandering undead on both sides of the road, and gradually cleared dozens of skeleton soldiers and zombies. In the eyes of the knights, Viscount Anwen unleashed the same courage as the Count under the pressure of the Scourge of the Dead, and his gaze towards Anwen was also full of recognition. Knights generally have this flaw. They enjoy bravery and detest cowardice. At this moment, Anwen was muttering strange words that no one had heard. Obtain 21 soul points, soul value. 1070, upgradable, finally, we can upgrade again. Anwen opened the panel and casually added attribute points to the body. Anwen Drake, normal template, level 7, stamina. 8+6, agility. 9, spirit. 11, charm. 21, Han Crow swordsmanship. Proficient in 5/200, cold crow breathing method. Mastering 3/150, basic archery. Beginner 14/50, status. Full of energy, soul value. 120, it's still too slow. Anwen closed the panel and sighed. He practiced breathing techniques on horseback and cleaned up wandering undead spirits, which finally helped him level up to level 7. As the level increases, more and more soul points are required for upgrading. The number of ordinary skeleton soldiers and zombies is simply not enough, and Anwen cannot return to his own territory town to kill monsters. According to the timeline of the initial plot, if one's territory is breached, then 5 days later, it will be the time for the Undead Scourge's army to attack Maple Leaf Castle. If he were to return now, coupled with various time-consuming tasks such as monster killing and cleaning, he would not be able to arrive at Maple Leaf Castle within 5 days. If you run into the gathering Undead Scourge Legion on the way, they will probably be gone with just one charge. I'm almost at Grey Station now. During the internal testing, I recorded about the branch line task here. Anwen frowned slightly as he looked at Dadao and said, if you can't meet him, it won't be so easy to transfer to the position of Glorious Knight when you arrive at Maple Leaf Castle. He doesn't want to participate in the defense battle of the undead attacking the city with his current strength. During the beta test, that battle was almost a grinding ground for life. A regular template that has not yet been transferred to trigger soul fire, and in that battlefield, it cannot even be considered cannon fodder. He needs a significant upgrade, in game terms, to get the next dungeon. Suddenly, Mark, who was exploring ahead, turned around and approached Andre with a serious expression on his face. "Knight, the carriage with the Rose Clan emblem in front. Here we go." Anwen breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, his gaze burning as he looked at Andre. "That's the coat of arms of Viscount Cecilia." The knight pondered slightly. This is another frontier nobleman, like Anwen, who is selected annually by the noble council to serve as the heir of the great nobles stationed in the western border. The aristocratic tradition of the Orson Empire is to bring these heirs with inheritance rights to the harsh borders of the empire at the age of 15.18, to cultivate an independent, brave, and resilient spirit. Only by enduring the hardships of the border can one be a qualified heir. This Viscount Cecilia is the commander-in-chief of the Knights of the West Wind, the Lord of Doppeson, and the eldest daughter of Count Marvin. I have just turned 18 and reached adulthood this year, 1 year older than Anwen. And now the other party's carriage is damaged on the roadside, which is exactly the sideline plot that Anwen has been waiting for. A group of 7 people came to the side of the damaged carriage. Andre looked around and judged with great experience. They have been attacked. It seems that Viscount Cecilia has been kidnapped. The other party's guard knights have chased after them. He pointed towards the nearby jungle and said, "It should be in that direction." "This indicates that it's not safe here," Mark replied with a frown. "We should leave here quickly." "No, we need to go save people," Anwen vetoed directly. "Are you joking? He just found a side plot, how could he possibly leave?" Lord Andre's face was solemn, and he did not recommend rescuing anyone. He advised, "We only have 7 knights, and the garrison soldiers are all ordinary people, so they are not useful. At most, there are only 3 knights who can go and save Viscount Cecilia. After all, the remaining knights still need to maintain the safety of Lord Anwen. If 3 knights could save each other, the defending knights of Viscount Cecilia would not be able to watch their own adults being abducted." Find the book Garden www.zhaozuiyuan.com. A person must be saved. Anwen interrupted Andre's words, his gaze fixed on Andre. "The third rule of the noble code is that nobles in the same realm must watch and help each other." "Andre, are you making me violate the requirements of the nobility regulations?" "This is a serious accusation. Even a knight like Andre cannot bear such accusations. Although the so-called regulations of the noble code of conduct are propaganda strategies used to enhance the noble character of the nobility, they cannot withstand the true belief of some people. But if the person who believes is a viscount like Anwen, Andre feels a bit uneasy. He could not refute the regulations and could only respond cautiously, "I am worried about your safety, sir. We ourselves lack strength. Cecilia will be abducted by the undead because she sent her elite defense forces to guide the people to flee towards Maple Leaf Castle." Anwen pondered the background of the side plot and tried to persuade Andre further. "She is a knight herself and lacks the strength she carries. She even takes the initiative to step up to the rear. I have no reason to turn a blind eye to noble companions with such qualities. Furthermore, with you as a knight, I don't think any low-level undead can stop your bravery." After saying this, Anwen looked at Andre nervously. He could strongly command the other party to follow his instructions, but Andre also had autonomy. He could forcibly take Anwen away and use his safety as a reason to avoid punishment in the noble court. He was worried that Andre would be too concerned about his own safety and refuse him. If it weren't for Andre, he wouldn't be able to complete this side dungeon alone. Andre took a deep look at Anwen, and after a while, he sighed. "Your will is my direction, sir." Chapter 4. Counterparts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. There it is. After stepping into the dry jungle, Anwen did not sit firmly in the back. He took the lead and instead guided the knights along the path. This branch-line copy was scanned more than 20 times during Anwen's internal testing, and the road was as familiar as walking from the bedroom to the bathroom. One could walk there with their eyes closed. Andrei frowned tightly, allowing him to ponder endlessly without knowing where Anwen's intelligence came from. Perhaps Count Torin has an intelligence group other than the detective knights, and has it been inherited by Lord Anwen? The knight pondered to himself in his heart. The view in front of me gradually became clear, and inside the dry wood jungle, a stone arch appeared unexpectedly. Tomb. Andrei paused for a moment before immediately lifting his spear. Alert. In the event of a natural disaster for the undead, encountering a tomb is like drilling a pit with a lantern, seeking death. Affected by the plague of the undead, death has spread to the earth, and graves are the primary target of erosion. The burial here includes old lords and their knights from decades or even centuries ago. Even Andrei would find it difficult to transform them into undead spirits. This is the cemetery of the pioneer knight. The time of death is only 30 years, Anwen looked at Andrei and breathed a sigh of relief, explaining to him. There is no difference between the environment and the game here, so there will be no changes in the undead inside. Under this level of undead disaster, one can recover and become an undead, at most at the level of a skeleton knight. Lord Anwen, do you know about this tomb? Andrei remained calm, but Mark couldn't help it anymore. He asked Anwen with some confusion. I have read the Chronicles of the Western Realm. It contains the life records of each lord and their knights, Anwen explained calmly. He did indeed see it. At that time, he searched for a lot of information in the game in order to make a branch. Mark recalled that before his territory was conquered, there was indeed a book like Chronicles of the Western Regions in Anwen's study. However, it was better called a classic than a book, with a total of 3,000 to 4,000 pages, which was thicker than the Imperial Code. As a knight who can use his hands but doesn't use his brain, Mark feels a headache when he sees a book, let alone open it. He simply admires Anwen's wisdom. He can read books like this, and most importantly, he remembers them. Of course, Anwen can continue reading, mainly because the game comes with built-in search, which can be keyword searched. However, there is no need for Anwen to explain now. He pointed to the entrance of the tomb and said, Andrei and Mark will accompany me down, and the others will be on standby. Lord Anwen. Andrei was about to speak, but was interrupted by Anwen. Inside is a narrow tunnel. How much do you think a pioneer knight would have to spend to build a tomb? I am in front, Mark is in the back, and you are in the middle to coordinate. Although I have received perfect reviews on my own, it was only after I switched jobs. We still need to be cautious now. After carefully inspecting the equipment, Anwen was the first to enter the tomb. The remaining knights looked at Andrei, and the captain had no choice but to follow Mark and arrange for the remaining to guard outside. Andrei felt the change in Anwen. After the self-territory was breached and fell from the city wall, Anwen has become stronger and harder. Perhaps this is the transformation brought about by the crisis. The Drake family style that emerged from the bones made Andrei both familiar and confused. Thinking that 2 months later, he would return to the southern region to report on his work, Andrei suppressed his restlessness and followed in Anwen's footsteps. In the long tunnel, light emanates from the walls, which is the effect of the luminous bacteria. Most of the graveyards of the pioneering knights, because they do not have the money to purchase expensive soul beads, use luminous bacteria for lighting. The 3 of them were all quiet. At the deep end ahead, there seemed to be a sound of metal collision. Still playing, Andrei said suddenly, having the best hearing. It should be. Anwen believed in the senses of his own knight and unconsciously quickened his pace. This is not a game, one person scrolled through another. There's only one copy like this, if it's gone, it's gone. He hurriedly walked out of the tunnel and arrived at the open tomb chamber. Looking around, a huge skeleton over 2 meters tall, holding an old shield and a decaying long sword, stood in the center of the tomb chamber. The long sword in its hand was pressed down, and the knight under the sword was holding up his shield with both hands, struggling to hold on, and was about to lose it. An Wen's eyes narrowed. Is this skeletal knight of this size torture difficult? Are all real realms following the highest difficulty level? This is hardcore enough. However, Anwen, who is extremely familiar with the backboard, is not afraid of elite monsters at this level. Andre, attack its leg bones. Anwen drew his long sword and charged towards the skeleton knight. Andre followed closely behind, moving faster than Anwen. He came first from behind, and his long sword pierced through the gap, striking the skeleton knight's thigh with force. Click and wipe. The skeletal knight's thigh bone instantly broke, and it couldn't resist the downward pressure, tilting its body to the side. The suppressed knight reacted quickly and took this opportunity to withdraw his shield and immediately distance himself from it. Purple gold pattern. Is it Andre from the Drake family? The other person asked loudly. That's right, the boy of the Westwind Knights. Andre scored a victory and pursued, but the skeleton knight's shield stood up, instantly blocking the person back. Where is your Viscount Cecilia? Lord Cecilia is behind it. The injury is not light. The Westwind Knight gritted his teeth and responded, staring at the skeleton knight with hatred in his eyes. If it weren't for this damn thing, Cecilia wouldn't have suffered any harm. Andre's face darkened as he suffered a lifeless injury. If he was not rescued in time, it would be difficult to say how his condition worsened. In no time, he needs to take down this skeleton knight first. This is not something that a soul-gathering level knight can deal with. Only this starlight level knight can engage in direct combat with the opponent. Unexpectedly, just as Andre was about to take action, Anwen spoke up and said, Andre, go around and save people. I'll distract it. Sir. Andre's face showed surprise as he couldn't understand the command. But at this point, it's too late to reason. Anwen's long sword had already been slashed at the neck of the skeleton knight, emitting a burst of sparks. The giant skeleton turned its head, and hatred was drawn to this incompetent person who knew no bounds. A silent roar erupted from its mouth, and the sword immediately swung towards Anwen. Anwen deftly dodged the attack by leaning against the giant sword on one side, and casually counterattacked with a sword, only to strike in the same position again. The skeleton knight went crazy, unable to accept such provocation. For it, repairing the injury to the thigh bone was just an instant. As the black dead energy rolled and condensed, the leg bones immediately returned to their original state. Immediately, the skeleton knight charged forward and swung his long sword towards Anwen. Left chop, right chop. Forward sprint. Next is a sweeping. Anwen's pace was very smooth. He dodged back and forth against the attack of the other party, like an elf walking in the rainstorm. No matter how fast the rain was, Anwen could not touch his clothes. The knight's long sword counterattacked, but repeatedly hit the neck bone of the skeleton knight, with a posture of not stopping without cutting off the head. Mark, who followed and was stunned. Andre, however, remembered his command and quickly avoided the skeleton knight. Behind it, Cecilia, with a painful expression on her face, couldn't get up and searched for the book garden www.zhaozuiyuan.com. The wound on her abdomen was filled with blood and black air. The situation is not good. Andre had experience with this kind of injury. He reached out and picked up the opponent horizontally, retreated back to the side of the Westwind Knight, and then took out a thick bottle of red potion to sprinkle on the wound. For a moment, the wound emitted a burning growl, and Cecilia's brow furrowed before relaxing again. The Holy Sea's Curse Elixir. The Westwind Knight kept staring at Andre, and as he saw him taking the medicine, he said gratefully, "The kindness of the Drake family must be rewarded by Black Rose. It's a bit early to say this now." Andre looked up at Anwen. Although he followed the command, he was still worried about Anwen's safety. But at this glance, he looked like Mark, who had been watching him all along, and froze. The fierce attack of the skeleton knight, even the Westwind knight and Mark had to avoid the sharp edge, but Anwen did not take it seriously at all. He interspersed in the storm-like attack, and occasionally counterattacked and hacked. In a short span of more than 10 seconds, a narrow gap appeared on the neck bone of the skeletal knight who was drawn away. It can be said that the skeleton knight did not strike Anwen with a single sword, but Anwen did not miss a single sword and attacked all at the same position. As time passed, the sword wound on the neck became deeper and deeper, and Anwen's counterattack became more rapid and efficient, until the final blow fell and the head of the skeleton knight was cut off with a sword. Then he stepped on the skull of the skeleton knight, rolling to the ground, and with a slight force, the skull crushed on the spot. Obtain 2,000 soul points. Basic rewards have not changed. Anwen exhaled, feeling a bit tired from the prolonged mental and physical exhaustion, but very happy. He reached out and pulled off the large shield from the motionless skeletal body, revealing a victorious smile. Chapter 5. Cecilia. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hardcore open world game. The main focus is on a player's free exploration, whether it's worldview or game battles. In the early stage of the branch tasks related to the undead disaster, Anwen almost searched the map of the Western Territory and also checked the forum strategy, finding a total of 12. Skeleton Knight is the first branch line. Also known as Novice Discouraging Knights. The opponent's attack mechanism is determined by AI combination. Although there are only 4 types, the combination methods are diverse, and new players who are not familiar with the Skeleton Knight's attack posture often suffer repeated torment here. Although difficult, the rewards are generous. With a soul value of 2,000 points, Anwen quickly clicked on the panel to upgrade, ensuring that both physical and mental health meet the requirements for job transfer. Level 10, cannot be promoted before job transfer. Stamina 8+7, Agility. 9+1, Spirit. 11+1, Hankro Swordsmanship. Proficient in 71/250, Soul Value. 620, watching the panel finally reach the level 10 transition threshold, Anwen finally breathed a sigh of relief. Oak Shield Blue Boutique Defense. 15 equipment with blue quality or below will not have wearing requirements, only equipment with green soul or above will have requirements for the wearer's attributes. Moreover, this shield is just big and doesn't even have any features. Being able to reach the blue level is also due to its much higher defense power than the initial shield. Watching Anwen's unscathed battle ending, Mark turned his head in a daze, his eyes filled with confusion, and he soulfully asked the cavalier, "Is Hanji swordsmanship so powerful?" "It should be. It's not related to swordsmanship." Andre hesitated for a moment. Jackdaw swordsmanship is Drake's initial training in swordsmanship, and in the knightly circle, it belongs to the basic swordsmanship of Rotten Street, which has nothing to do with the word strong. But Lord Anwen clearly used the Cold Crow swordsmanship, and Andre also saw for the first time that an ordinary person could use basic swordsmanship to defeat a knight-level undead with soul fire. "What's wrong with you? How's Cecilia doing?" Anwen turned around and looked at the 2 dazed knights, frowning and asking. "I have already used the spell clearing potion." The answer was from the West Wind Knight, "The dead energy has been dispelled, and the wound is healing." Throwing the shield casually to Mark, Anwen nodded at the words and said, "What about the rest of you?" "Cecilia only brought you 1. Lord Hui, we are a team of 7, and the remaining 6 have gone to Maple Leaf Village. There are still survivors there." The Shifeng Knight looked regretful, and if it weren't for this order, he wouldn't have put his own adults in danger. "She has this temperament." Anwen sighed. This red-haired girl, dressed in knight armor, is known as the 3 major white moonlight in the minds of beta players in Abyss. Unfortunately, during the defense battle at Maple Leaf Castle, this girl still died on the battlefield, and the CG scene became a reason for players to send blades to the planner. Anyway, let's go out first. Anwen walked towards the exit of the tomb first. Time is running out, we must arrive at Maple Leaf Castle in the next 2 days. After leaving the tomb, the damaged carriage was tidied up, and the Shifeng Knight mounted the carriage, mixing with Cecilia and Anwen's team to continue along the main road. During the internal testing of the plot, if this branch is not completed, Cecilia will not have any problems. She will eventually arrive at Maple Leaf Castle and be cured by the Holy Sea's glorious knights. I didn't know why at first, but now Anwen knows that because Andre and his team successfully broke through, they must have chosen the path to Maple Leaf Castle, and the probability of saving Cecilia is very high. After all, in the plot line, Anwen had already died in the territory. As for why the Skeleton Knight did not kill Cecilia in the first place, Anwen was very clear about it. Noble sacrifices. Using nobles who have opened up soul fire for sacrifice is more effective than ordinary people. Most nobles possess the ability to gather soul fire, and they also have sufficient resources and knowledge to develop such power. So the Maple Leaf Fortress, which gathers a large number of nobles, is an inevitable battlefield. Anwen gradually sorted out everything. Time has arrived at night. Looking down along the western mountain range, Maple Leaf Castle is already in the distance. However, looking at the dead horses running through the mountains and seeing Maple Leaf Castle is mainly because this western main city is tall and majestic. At most by tomorrow night, we can enter the city. Andre calculated his itinerary and reported to Anwen. Don't worry about the undead along the way. Strive to arrive tomorrow afternoon, Anwen pondered for a moment and arranged in a determined tone. Now that we have reached the bottleneck of job transfer, obtaining more soul points is not very meaningful. Instead of wasting energy, it is better to switch jobs first. Lord Anwen, Andre suddenly became serious. He stared at Anwen and asked word by word, have you reached the bottleneck of condensing soul fire? In theory, it is indeed in the stage described by Andre when there is no job transfer at level 10. Anwen nodded in surprise, wanting to know Andre's next words. If your Hanji breathing technique reaches its extreme, I can provide you with the advanced Knight's breathing technique. Although it is not a precious cultivation method, you don't have to worry about having no way to go until you reach the peak of the Starlight Knight. Another career transfer path. Anwen wouldn't mind having an extra path to advance. Even if he completes the first branch and has confidence in obtaining advancement from the Vatican of Maple Leaf Castle, having an additional path is always a good thing. Andre saw Anwen nod, feeling very excited. He took out a piece of parchment from his body and reached out to hand it to Anwen. Fragmented black breathing technique, special prop. One of the necessary conditions for transitioning to Black Knight. The first stage of transitioning can be initiated when the level reaches level 10. Phase 1 requirements. Stamina 15, agility 10, Anwen's face instantly darkened. If it were this thing, it could turn good into bad. He coldly asked Andre, are you practicing this breathing technique? Of course not. Andre smiled bitterly, I didn't have such a good opportunity back then. This was entrusted to me by Lord Torin before I arrived in the Western Realm. Count Torin. My own father. Anwen's heart thumped. He looked gloomy because there were huge problems with this breathing method itself. Zhaoshuyuan.com. This is a breathing technique circulating within the Chaos Church and also a path for the transition of the Black Knight profession. When the game plot reaches the appearance of the Chaos Cult, Anwen fights against the Black Knights. Is your father a member of the Chaos Cult? This plot line was unknown to Anwen, but if it were true, then the problem would be huge. However, it is also possible that the loot of that reckless father's battle may not necessarily be the same. Anwen currently has too little information to draw a conclusion. It can be certain that this thing cannot be used for one's own job transfer. I have my own path now, Anwen put away the parchment. This breathing technique is very good, let me keep it. Okay, sir. Andrei said nothing. The two continued on, as if the conversation had never happened before. At this moment, the Shifeng knight shouted from the carriage, "Lord Anwen, my lord is awake. Could you kindly come and meet me?" And when you stopped his horse, pondered for a moment, and then returned to the carriage. The red-haired girl's face remained pale, but her spirits had improved significantly. She struggled to open the corner of her mouth and softly thanked, "Viscount Anwen of the Drake family, thank you for your help. May the sun shine on your path forever." As both nobles and followers of the Vatican, this is just something that should be done. Anwen did not care about Cecilia's gratitude, as he saved the girl mainly for the sake of dungeon experience, and secondly, for another purpose. Anwen met Cecilia's slightly reserved and shy gaze, and spoke frankly. "If the Black Rose family is willing to repay, then introduce me to the glorious knight Captain Sock at Maple Leaf Castle. I know, he is your uncle." Chapter 6. Transfer of Employment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the year 211 of the old calendar, in mid-May, Maple Leaf Castle finally arrived. After going through a breakout battle and rescuing Cecilia from her grave, she drove non-stop along the main road for 2 days and finally arrived at Maple Leaf Castle in the afternoon. At this point, there were less than 2 days left until the siege of the undead army. The soldiers at the city gate recognized the badges of the Purple Flower and Black Rose from a distance, and only then could they open the gate close. They were skilled in their movements and respectful in their attitude, which was much better than the state in which players had to accept exploitation when they arrived at the gate. The power of the imperial aristocracy can only be maximized in a civilized society. Reincarnation is also a technical job, and the aristocratic status of the Drake family really saves a lot of trouble, Anwen muttered to himself. Anwen and his entourage, who entered the city gate, headed straight for Maple Leaf Castle Cathedral. Cecilia must come here to seek refuge, after all, her uncle is here to serve as the head of the Holy See's glorious knights. This red-haired young viscount has a pale complexion and is completely powerless. Although I have taken medication, my physical fitness is not as easy to recover. The Vatican has healing magic here, but it is possible to treat Cecilia while arranging for her to rest here. In front of the cathedral is the training ground for the Holy See's Knights of Glory, where dozens of Knights of Glory are already undergoing daily training. The natural disaster of the undead has occurred, and the Vatican cannot remain indifferent. They have the most information about this disaster, and even the nobles are not as complete as the Vatican's intelligence. At the entrance of the training ground stood a burly middle-aged man with bulging muscles. Although he was not wearing armor or a sword, at first glance, he knew he was a powerful figure. "My dear niece." The strong man welcomed the team and gently hugged Cecilia with a tone of guilt and self-blame, murmuring slowly. After a brief embrace, he looked up at Anwen and bowed. "May the sun forever shine on your path. Viscount Anwen Drake, thank you for your help. If the Drake family has any demands in the future, Sock will do my best. The holy sunlight always shines on us," Anwen responded to a noble salute, looking at still weak Cecilia. "I do have a request." Sock smiled and said, "Please speak." "I want to become a shining knight." Anwen said word by word. Sock paused for a moment, then looked at Andrei behind Anwen's body and frowned slightly. To be frank, although the glorious knight has a reputation, his power is not much stronger than that of noble knights. Moreover, his demands for faith and spirit are far higher than those of noble knights. "I know. Anwen is very clear about the pros and cons of the Radiant Knight. After all, he wrote most of the strategy posts in the beta. This profession has the same upgrade boost as regular knights, and in the early stages, only light and dispel are divine spells. In other words, there is no significant difference in combat effectiveness when facing knights of the same rank. However, when the Radiant Knight reaches level 50 and can be transferred to Judge Knights, this situation will be completely different. Having a player panel, it is not about qualifications and beliefs that restrict Anwen's advancement, but about the career development prospects. If a soul-gathering knight wants to advance to the Starlight Knight stage, it will take a long time to deal with the tedious breathing method adaptation problem. Taking the example of the cold crow breathing method, the next stage of the falcon breathing method will be exchanged for achievements in the Noble Council. In the next stage of promotion to the Moon Shadow Knight, the red falcon breathing technique needs to be obtained from the imperial family in the imperial capital. Anwen doesn't have so much time to play the full collection process. He's not a casual player who is not afraid of death. Without facing the defense battle of the undead army attacking the city first, he can't go there either. This is the limitation of indigenous identity. When facing war, flee to a safe place. That would require going to the noble court, let alone obtaining the subsequent cultivation law. Compared to that, the Vatican route has fewer restrictions and clearer paths, even if there are more attribute restrictions, but this is not a problem for Anwen. After all, some additional conditions can be met. The glorious knight is my only request, Anwen said again. I hope Captain Sok agrees. Sok did not refuse again, and Anwen's expression was very firm. He was a devout Vatican believer, reminding him that he had fulfilled his duty once, and saying anything else would be an offense to the believer's beliefs. Please follow me. Sok turned around and guided Anwen along with him. In the cathedral, there are statues of knights who have been transferred to glory. The process is very simple, just take an oath in front of the statue, and after the statue is recognized, it will transmit the Radiant Knight's specialized sunlight breathing technique. However, Sok did not bring Anwen to the statue, but instead led him all the way to the prayer room. The glorious knight took out a book from the horizontal table in the prayer room and handed it to Anwen. Taking the oath to join the glorious knight requires cultivating faith from a young age, but for nobles, this is difficult to achieve, Sok explained. Nobles have their own education and cognition, and most of them cannot resonate with the deities. So if there are noble believers who want to join the glorious knight, we will provide this. Brainstorming cognition and self-cultivation. Anwen also knows the rules of the Vatican, and in fact, most nobles have trained knights in this way since childhood, but one is through faith and the other is through loyalty education. Complete Book of Sunlight Breathing Method, Special Prop. One of the necessary conditions for transitioning to the glorious knight. The first stage of transitioning can be initiated when the level reaches level 10. Phase 1 Job Transfer Requirements. Physical Fitness 15, Spiritual 12, Charm 12, the Vatican gives the path of cultivation to the entire book. What comparison can you make with your chaos cult at the book garden? www.zhaoshuyuan.com. Anwen read and silently roast at the same time. After recording his breathing techniques and divine techniques, he caressed his chest with his left hand and clenched his fist horizontally in front of him with his right hand, bowing his head slightly and performing an orthodox religious salute. Thank you, Captain Sok. The Black Rose family has already paid off. This is not a return from the family, my child, Sok shook his head with a smile. This is recognition of the believers. You wouldn't think Cecilia's life was so cheap, would you? But the family's reward is her father's business. I can't take over the situation. Anyway, thank you for your gift. Anwen responded while quickly opening the panel. Anwen Drake, regular template, transferable, after his name, the three big characters, can be transferred, lit up, and Anwen clicked on it without hesitation. As the warmth of the body surged, a massive force burst out from Anwen's heart, igniting the flame of the soul from within, and a bright light condensed from within. Soul fire. This is the first step towards advancing to the extraordinary level. To practice the sunlight breathing technique, one must concentrate and remain calm. When you are able to enter a stable breathing state, then try to condense your soul. Sok was also prepared to emphasize some precautions, but the soul power transmitted from Anwen directly interrupted his words. He stared blankly at the scene before him. A noble young man who had never been exposed to the Vatican's practice method, had just received the sunlight practice method. After briefly flipping through it for less than half a minute, he became a radiant knight in front of himself. That soul fire, compared to any shining knight seen. Everyone must be dazzling. Chapter 7. Recruitment. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Evan Drake, Radiant Knight Elite Template, Career Bonus. 10% bonus on negative energy creatures attacks, template bonus. Knight Elite level, each point of stamina adds 2 points of increased vitality, level 11, vitality. 232/232, stamina. 100 out of 100, stamina. 16, agility. 10, spirit. 12, charm. 21, Han Crow swordsmanship. Proficient in 71/250, cold crow breathing method. Mastering 3/150, sunlight breathing method. Beginner 0 out of 100, basic archery. Beginner 14/50, sun divine art. Beginner 0 out of 100, status. Full of energy, soul value. 20 Anwen walked out of the cathedral feeling satisfied. Transfer completed, template improved. Everything was as expected, and by initially transitioning to the Glory Knight, one could have achieved such an improvement. If it were in beta testing, it would have been considered the ceiling of the player's middle panel. Looking at Andre walking towards him, Anwen smiled slightly. It's all done now. Lord Torin would be very pleased to see you today. The knight burst into laughter. Joining the glorious Knights of the Vatican is not something that ordinary nobles can do. Mainly because of Cecilia. Anwen was very self-aware and did not save the other party's actions. He did not have such smooth contact with Captain Sock. By the way, where is she? I was taken in by the missionaries of the Vatican for treatment. Andre brought the warhorse to Anwen. What should we do next? Are we going back to the southern border? No, let's go pick up the conscription order. And when you mounted his horse, if we go now, we will also be called back on the way. The information about the scourge of the undead has already been submitted to the aristocratic council through espionage. Unless unexpected, the orders of the aristocratic council have now arrived at Bowles. In the plot, Maple Leaf Castle announced a conscription order before the defensive battle. All nobles seeking refuge in Maple Leaf Castle must unconditionally accept combat orders. At that time, Anwen, who was involved in this plot, naturally knew very well. Looking at Andre, who was somewhat confused, Anwen added another sentence. You know, although the reactions of those lords in the aristocratic council are slow, the speed of notification after issuing the conscription order is astonishing. I don't want to run back and forth. The conscription order. Andre's eyes were filled with memories. He was not a young boy who had never participated in war scenes before. When the Empire's forefront operations were in full bloom, he served as a vanguard in the southern region. As a Viscount of the Western Territory, we can obtain at least one regiment of troops, and one led the team in front. First come, first served, the elite soldiers of Maple Leaf Castle are only a few thousand, and if we're late, we'll only be left with scraps of information. On the way, remember to ask Mark to buy a bottle of Maple Leaf Burger's specialty bearded liquor. Guarding the battlefield is the main storyline of the first scene for players, interspersed with the battlefield of the undead attacking the city. Relying solely on oneself is difficult to achieve any results. Maple Leaf Fortress must be destroyed in the plot, and the killing power of the plot makes players feel helpless. This is not a challenging battlefield, and they cannot connect online. They can only watch the city be attacked and civilians suffer heavy casualties. But now that everything has not started yet, Anwen still has a chance to fight. Even if he cannot defend Maple Leaf Castle, he can do his best to save potential plot characters. Thinking of this, Anwen couldn't help but think of the silver-armored woman holding an epic long sword, standing at the forefront of the Vatican Knights. Saint Selena. If this person did not die in the first act of the plot, he would undoubtedly be the highest general resisting the abyss in the later stage. Regardless of talent, age, or seniority, Saint Selena is a prominent figure in the Holy See and one of the few star knights on the battlefield of the Scourge of the Dead. Gathering souls, starlight, moonlight, corona, legend. According to the performance stage of soul power, the power of knights in the game is divided into 5 levels. In the early stage, those who possess and use soul power are called the soul gathering level. The ability to achieve soul power enhancement and external release is at the starlight level. The moon shadow level possesses self-characteristics and develops unique soul power abilities. The corona level is capable of constructing a unique soul power realm, where the strength of knights themselves is greatly enhanced, and the enemies covered by the realm are weakened. This type of knight is already the ceiling of imperial knights. Legendary knights are extremely limited beings in history, each of whom is an extraordinary figure who can rival one country. The fusion of soul power and self creates a unique divine power that is almost unbeatable. In the knightly team, star-level knights with soul power will be called Grand Knights, and André and Celine are both at this level. And the Moon Shadow level knight has one in each of the 4 major legions of the Empire. As for the coronal level knights, there is only one in the Imperial Royal Knights. With the basic settings of the game in mind, Anwen and his team also arrived at the aristocratic council center of Maple Leaf Castle. As the primary building of the Western aristocracy, the council center was built with an exceptionally grand scale, with a statue of Emperor Sores I standing at the entrance, as high as the council center in a 3-story European-style building. Pushing open the thick red wooden door, walking into the hall, one can see 8 pillars that go straight into the ceiling. The floor is covered with luxurious carpets, and in the center is a long table for 20 nobles to discuss. As a viscount, Anwen could naturally enter here without giving a notice and without obstruction, which also led to hearing Count Bolza's loud voice when he entered. This lord is arguing with the imperial messenger. You want me to find someone? Where am I going to find someone? Bowles patted the long table, his veins bulging. The strange and rapid arrival of the undead scourge, only 5 out of the 16 noble territories in the country have reported news, and they are all seeking help. What does it mean to figure it out on your own? The Southern Wind Legion is just 300 miles away. Why don't you send them over? The imperial messenger faced distress, and he was just a messenger. However, how could he speculate on the Emperor's thoughts? He could only reluctantly explain, the Breeze Legion is guarding the Pereg Kingdom, which you are well aware of. The western region itself is vast and sparsely populated, and the impact of the undead will not be out of control. As long as we can gather the knights' teams from each noble territory, it is not a problem to defend Maple Leaf Castle. Furthermore, the Holy See's Glorious Knights Order, which was launched yesterday, can arrive here in no more than 2 days. Funny. Bowles didn't show any face. Can I mobilize the papal army? Or can I command the second generation of nobles who come to Guild? I only have 5,000 legions from Maple Leaf Castle. Find Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com, but outside, there are countless undead spirits. They are tireless and don't need to eat. You block them one by one, and guard them one by one. Come and try to hold on, can you? As Anwen approached, the nobleman from the western region turned his head in mockery and said, "Look, there are still guys coming to decentralize power now. Good day, Lord Bowles and the messenger." Anwen didn't take it seriously and politely greeted the 2 of them. "Since the Count has guests, I won't disturb you either," the messenger said with relief and quickly applied oil to his feet. Cut. Bowles took out a metal kettle, took a sip of liquor, and turned to look at Anwen. "Let's talk about it first. I won't give you a single penny of military strength. If you want to participate in the conscription, you can figure out a way for yourself. Any earl who can claim a territory is not a fool." Although it is unclear where Anwen came from, the envoy recently issued an imperial conscription order, and no nobleman has the right to resist. Bowles knows Anwen's intentions with his buttocks. Lord Bowles. Anwen had already anticipated Bowles' attitude, but he was not unprepared either. I want to exchange a message for the command of your Winter Corps. The one that was just established half a year ago. You have very good information. Bowles looked at Anwen with some surprise. Although the establishment of the Winter Corps was not kept confidential, not every cat and dog could know. The nobles who can receive this news are at least equal to him in terms of intelligence system. Let's hear it, Bowles said, showing some interest in Anwen's intelligence. Before the pitch-black eternal night arrives, the afterglow is the only light. Anwen silently looked into Bowles' eyes, the lawkeeper. Bowles. Chapter 8. Winter. You are listening at novelfull.audio. If it weren't for André watching from a distance, Bowles would have drawn his sword and started fighting. Anwen's words are no different from threatening words like, I know a secret about you, and, you don't want your identity to be known to others, do you? A law-abiding person. This is an organization that circulated on the mainland before the empire was established. Their original intention in establishing was to resist the invasion of foreign worlds. That's right, whether it's the abyss or the spiritual realm, any non-native creature is a creature from another world. Undead spirits initially did not exist in the continent. It was not until some seekers opened the path to the spiritual realm that they were given the power to awaken the dead. The seekers who initially gained knowledge of exotic creatures and attracted them have caused many disasters on the continent. The reason for the establishment of the Order Keeper organization is to protect the mainland from being detected and invaded by such extraterrestrial creatures, and to safeguard normal order from being influenced by these fanatics who pursue extraterrestrial secrets. But this organization has never stood in the sunshine. Perhaps the founder of the first generation came from the royal family and did not have enough trust in the quality of humanity itself, so the first rule of the organization of the law-abiding is to keep identity secrets. Bowles, who was immediately identified by Anwen, was emotionally agitated for a moment before calming down. He took out the wine jug and took another sip before saying, How did you know? I don't remember bringing in new people recently. You can trust me, Lord Bowles. Although I am not a member of the lawful ones, I strongly agree with your philosophy of protecting the continent from foreign invasion. After all, if you are not a member of our tribe, your heart will always be different. Anwen explained, we have a common enemy. Do you think those undead spirits are the whole picture of this Western crisis? Bowles looked at Anwen with a smile, common enemy. You don't even know who our enemy is. Chaos Cult, Anwen replied directly, if you're talking about them. Bowles paused for a moment, his expression a bit stiff, obviously choked on by the words. He took out the wine jug again, but it was already empty inside. He frowned and shook his brow, then took it back with some displeasure. Anwen waved his hand and Mark walked over, delivering a delicate bottle of wine before retreating. Whisker wine. Bowles sighed, you really have figured people out. If I don't have enough confidence, I don't need to come to you, do I? Anwen laughed. The first act hides the plot. A promiscuous person who loves to drink liquor. During the beta testing, many beta testers went through this process in order to gain command of the Winter Legion, and they were very familiar with the process. Although it's just a team of 100, in the first act of the plot before the challenge mode that opens up players online, it's the biggest reliance for players. Of course, no one can do anything about the plot when it comes to killing. If this level doesn't die, how can we continue the storyline of spreading ashes and fire on the wilderness? Survivors inherit the beliefs of the deceased and develop hatred towards the chaotic cult that disrupts the world order, thus fighting against this villain all the way. The plotline has always been like this. The command of the Legion can be given to you. But you probably know that it means you and we are on the same front from now on. Bowles pondered for a moment, nodded in agreement, but then spoke with a gloomy tone. If you betray, you know the end. I don't want to encounter the Night Watchman's assassination unit, you don't have to worry. Anwen answered honestly. My family's Grand Knight Andre has enough combat experience to lead the Winter Army and also serve as a special army to assist you in defending Maple Leaf Castle. Alright, kid. For the sake of beard wine. Bowles took out a copper military plaque with a noble shield and sword carving. Take it and go to the Maple Leaf Forest. I don't want to see you again except on the battlefield. Anwen smiled and took it. He took 2 steps back towards Bowles, then turned around and walked outside. Along the way, he threw the bronze medal directly to Andre. Until they walked out of the conference center, Andre and the knights behind them had not returned to their senses. So easy, did you get it? Looking at the command card in his hand, Andre muttered somewhat thoughtlessly. Is it easy? 1,000 beta testers spent more than 10 days exploring the plot like scraping land in the first act, only to discover after the 7th round that Bowles still had such a secret. Can this be called easy? Without this conversation, Bowles wouldn't have paid much attention to you. He would have been the vanguard of Maple Leaf Castle's resistance, or he would have died at the first moment of Maple Leaf Castle's destruction. Drunk and promiscuous lords are much more reliable than those who adhere to noble elegance but only know how to escape. What a satirical ending. Anwen was not prepared to explain these things. Time is running out, Andre. You lead the team to take over the Winter Legion. Mark, you bring 2 people and we'll go out to the city. Now out of the city. Mark was startled in his heart. There are many more undead spirits outside the city compared to when we first arrived. Shall we wait until Lord Knight takes over the Legion before we go out? That won't be enough time. Anwen shook his head and said, there are not many noble lords who can escape, and even fewer think of seeking refuge in Maple Leaf Castle. We must go out to meet them, at least to ensure that Maple Leaf Castle has sufficient defensive strength before encountering the siege of the undead. We have made one of the 12 branches, and before the defense war starts, there are at least 3 branches that can be done. These soul points and Anwen don't want to waste it all. Transferring is just a job transfer, and as the level increases, more and more soul points are required. Completing 3 branch lines outside the city can at least raise Anwen's level to level 20. Such a level of Radiant Knight can at least participate in the main battlefield and not become cannon fodder. Still waiting to take over the Legion before departing. Bringing 3 knights is considered cautious for oneself. If possible, Anwen doesn't want to bring anyone who snatches their heads. Zhaoshuyuan.com 2 groups of people went their separate ways. Without Andre by my side, although I feel less secure, the free air is fresher. The knight always stared at him, making Anwen feel uncomfortable all the way. He even had to speak according to his identity, afraid of any revealing situation. There's no need to worry about these knights like Mark, after all, they only know how to fight, and the brain-eating demons have to look at their heads and cry. Just as he stepped out of the city gate, a team of people and horses suddenly caught up behind him, with the bright red hair at the forefront exceptionally prominent. The girl arrived by Anwen's side on horseback, smiled and said, the Knights of the West Wind are here to report. Head snatchers. Anwen asked angrily, are you recovering from your injury now? Why are you following us? Cecilia's face turned much redder, and the Vatican was truly the chief religious power of the empire, wielding healing magic. She was able to restore her combat effectiveness in just a few hours. The nobles in the same realm must stand by and help each other, the girl chuckled playfully. After all, we nobles' descendants are all in a competitive relationship, and I don't want your achievements to be compared to yours. You actually returned the words to me. Also, under the natural disaster of the undead, is there a crisis where humans and animals do not exist, and is there still a competitive relationship? Does the competition send blood quickly? Anwen did not point out the caution of this young girl, and he did not have the right to manage the legitimate daughter of the Black Rose family. Okay. Anwen smiled helplessly and said, don't blame me for not waiting for you if you can't keep up. Under the speech of the old straight man, the 2 teams merged into one. moving towards the direction of sunset. On the desolate border of the western region, sparse but clustered ashes burn with a glimmer of hope, although few, they are exceptionally brilliant. Chapter 9. Outside the City. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. 30 miles outside Maple Leaf Castle. The faint moonlight reflects a distance of up to 100 meters, which can be vaguely seen. On the desolate land, there are constantly figures flickering. No one dares to light a torch. In the pitch-black night, the faint light of the torch is like a lighthouse. The crowd could only follow behind the knights, cautiously surging towards the city. A flash of fire suddenly appeared. After crossing a straight line, it quickly annihilates again. The head of the zombie fell to the ground, raising a cloud of dust. This is the 17th one. The red-haired girl had a straight and beautiful figure, counting while looking aside. The young man waving his silver sword did not look at her, nor even respond. Surrounded by the undead he had slain, one after another fell like a small mountain. The girl pouted with a hint of dissatisfaction and said, "This guy has unlimited stamina. The rascal of Drake family. It's really like a rumor." The old knight beside the girl laughed. "Miss, what do you compare with him?" "Anwen is not a reckless man." Cecilia heard this and immediately shifted her firepower, staring over with death. The old knight choked for a moment, but the ant's smile on his face became increasingly apparent. "Yes, it's really smart to quickly organize civilian smear campaigns." The eldest daughter of an 18-year-old count and the young captain of the Westwind Knights, the old knight will not find himself arguing uninteresting. The nobles who have the courage to enter the wilderness at this time and save the common people. The old knight felt that they were basically the two in front of him. My own young lady is also considered old. It's rare to have someone who shares a similar odor and even takes the risk of following her out of the city. Hey, the count is a bit distressed. Feeling a sense of rebellion in his heart, the old knight stood guard on the side of the team and killed the surrounding skeleton soldiers with one sword. The sense of stagnation on the blade made him frown slightly. The lethargy is getting heavier and heavier. This is not a good phenomenon. The calamity of the undead is escalating, indicating that there will be even more difficult creatures to deal with, no longer comparable to these scattered decaying bones and stumbling corpses today. The team was taken to the patrol area of the soldiers guarding Maple Leaf Castle, and the knights gathered once again. Waiting for Anwen to chop off the head of the last zombie, everyone listened as he said something that no one understood. A total of 1061 points. It's getting fewer and fewer. Anwen turned around and saw Cecilia with a displeased expression. She had been ignored by Anwen for a while, and even if this man was not a rascal, he could still be labeled as a straight man. Have the survivors of Dongjin finished responding? Yes, Lord Anwen, estimated that we have saved over 1,200 people. Mark's response was somewhat proud, as these achievements would be counted towards knightly glory and he might even receive the Imperial Cross in the future. So set off and head towards Dongjin. Anwen waved his sword and pointed, and everyone immediately began to pull out. If nothing unexpected happens, the timid alchemy lord is now hiding in the laboratory of the cellar. In the background of the game abyss, there are only sorcerers and alchemists in the casting class. The Holy See is not called magic, it is a divine spell bestowed by the gods according to their level of faith. Legend has it that at the beginning of the continent, there were no spells on this land. It was not until a group of explorers who sought the truth of the world opened the door to the world that spells began to spread. Just like in early D&D games, the spells in Abyss need to be equipped with spell slots to be used. Regardless of your profession, there will naturally be a spell slot that can be kept constant. Using constant spells does not consume mana, but rather consumes one's own physical strength. Veteran knights, when their talent reaches a bottleneck, will choose to find a spell to seek a breakthrough in strength. During the beta test, Anwen also looked for spells, but in the early stages of the plot, only the Lord of Dongjin had spells, and players did not have much choice. Fortunately, the practicality of this spell is very high, and it is not considered a useless sideline. If you want to expand the spell position in the later stage, you need not only to load the spell casting props, but also to use meditation to accumulate magic power for the props. In short, it is very troublesome. This expectation setting is often complained about by players collectively. However, in the final scenario of the internal test, not many people hit the magic props, so although there are many roast, it does not affect the overall situation. Flames Exhale. This is the spell that the Alchemist Lord used to suppress the bottom of the box. It's not difficult to obtain this spell, just save the alchemist. But the difficulty lies in the fact that among the undead guarding Dongjin, there is a corpse demon at the peak level of a soul-gathering knight, who is still an elite template. There are many high blood defense moves. It can be considered a nightmare for early players. Players who are able to complete skeleton knights have achieved breakthroughs and discourages. I will face these elite little bosses again in the second branch, and those with a slightly bad temper are already smashing their helmets and cursing dog planners. Anwen, who has increased his combat power and obsessive-compulsive disorder, cannot ignore the sidelines, but when facing such a small boss, he still needs to have a strategic plan. It's not the best way for an excellent player to act recklessly. So, do you mean to lure away those skeleton soldiers? Cecilia widened her eyes and looked at Anwen puzzled. And then you go alone to deal with the armored corpse demon. What kind of speech is this? Descendants of the Drake family, it's okay then. Do I remember the soul fire you only condensed during the day today? The old knight also frowned. Your family knight probably wouldn't agree to this plan. Don't worry, they won't have any objections to the book garden www.zhaoshuyuan.com. Mark. Anwen glanced at Mark, depriving him of his right to speak. Since you're here with me, you have to follow my command. Looking at Cecilia who still wanted to refute, Anwen interrupted the other person. Overlord. Dictatorship. The girl exclaimed in dissatisfaction. Everyone looked at each other, but in the end, they couldn't refute this truth. Although Cecilia had a stubborn expression on her face, she could not do anything to lower Anwen's authority at this moment. Obeying orders is the foundation of a knight. So, along with Cecilia, a total of 11 knights, they all began to infiltrate towards the east town, one dragging a low-level undead to the corner to tidy up. Only Anwen strode towards the center of Dongjin, the entrance to the cellar of the Lord's mansion. At a distance of less than 20 meters, a medium-sized corpse demon with blue soul fire in its eyes sat on the stairs in front of the mansion. It was ragged all over, with scattered leather armor hanging on it. Underneath the decaying flesh and blood, it was an emotionless walking corpse. His eyes slowly moved towards Anwen, and the corpse demon stood up, standing in front of him with a long sword and performing a standard knightly salute. You're quite polite, huh? Anwen smiled and suddenly kicked out the stones on the road. As the opponent drew his sword and chopped the stones, Anwen had already rushed towards him. A silver light flashed down. Double sword collision. Sparks shot everywhere. The two bodies intertwined, and Anwen turned around and slashed again. The corpse demon also refused to be outdone, carrying a sword to resist. Both of them took a step back and stood in a standoff. Anwen took a deep breath and raised his sword body flat, with the tip pointing towards the corpse demon. Let me show you the true gameplay of players in holographic games. Chapter 10. Fierce Battle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The degree of freedom in holographic games is unprecedented. This is not only about casual conversations, map exploration, and information collection, but also about more important battles where the game has a higher degree of freedom. You can use the basic swordsmanship that comes with the game, and the system will correct your posture and deliver a strike with normal strength. But experienced expert players have another set of standards. Modern fencing tactics. This is a set of gameplay techniques summarized by countless holographic melee players, equivalent to exclusive martial arts secrets for holographic games. Even in the real world, players with enough strength and skill to meet the standards can use it. In any situation involving PvP and PV1-10, high players will almost always use it, but with different levels of skill. By removing stereotypical postures and fully utilizing the attributes of game characters and their tireless energy recovery characteristics, this practical swordsmanship, although not aesthetically pleasing, has been created. Anwen, who has a player panel, may be the only one in the current world who masters and can use this set of swordsmanship. There are many moves of the corpse demon, but there is still evidence to follow. Anwen, who passed through the second branch of the small boss on the backboard, knew what move to take as soon as the other party raised their hand. But Anwen's moves have never been seen by the other party at all. As for AI, it can only determine the inherent swordsmanship moves. Where did it know about this player's self-playing style? Even in this real world, the corpse demon cannot figure out Anwen's path. His own long sword slashed and was easily dodged by Anwen. After the opponent rolled around, he was thrust in front of him, but he was fiercely swept. Anwen is like a rolling gourd, with awkward movements but incredibly flexible. With another strike, Anwen crouched on the ground and couldn't withdraw again. As he was about to strike, Anwen suddenly lifted his sword and struck it right on the opponent's body. This move hit the opponent's attack rhythm with a pinch point, causing the long sword that was deflected and causing the corpse demon's body to pause, opening the empty door wide. Experienced the shield reversal from the holographic era. With a sneer in his heart, Anwen took this opportunity and struck the opponent's chest with a sword. As the opponent quickly retreated and dodged, he pulled out a long wound. The corpse demon suffered a significant decrease in lethality from this blow. Anwen, who switches jobs and ignites soul fire, can more clearly judge the opponent's strength changes, which is equivalent to seeing the opponent's health bar. It's possible. Anwen stood up, his figure caught up again, avoiding the continuous slashing of the corpse demon, and the rhythm of 3 flashes and 1 strike kept up, constantly consuming the opponent. The night team, which had cleared up scattered undead spirits in the surrounding area, began to gather. The old knight arrived at the battlefield first and curiously watched the battle between Anwen and the corpse demon. What kind of tricks is this Drake kid from the Drake family? This is not the cold crow sword technique either. Returning swordsmanship is not swordsmanship, said Cecilia. After all, she is more knowledgeable. That is a method that relies on her own prediction and is later used by others. There is no move at all. The girl gritted her teeth a bit, as if she had seen some unattainable talent monster, feeling like her talent in swordsmanship was being crushed. Ugly is a bit unsightly. The old knight didn't know how to evaluate this kind of play, but surprisingly it was very effective. He even reached out his hand and gestured twice, as if learning. Don't learn, you can't. Cecilia was quite clear-headed. Speaking of which, isn't Dongjin just under siege? Why are there so few undead souls? The controlled undead have all left, leaving behind those that cannot be controlled, the old knight judged with great experience. So it's not a good thing. Among the uncontrollable undead, there are already souls gathering at their peak. Who knows what the situation will be like in a large army? Has the request for help letter been sent? Got it. The old knight sighed, but can the Westwind Knights really come over? You should have a better idea than me. One of the 4 major knights directly under the royal order. The likelihood of coming for rescue is very low without a command. Even if the eldest daughter of the regimental leader is here, the result is the same. Cecilia felt a bit sad in her heart, not because she felt a sense of abandonment, but because she felt sad about the royal family's inaction even in the face of such a natural disaster threat. We can only rely on ourselves. Cecilia firmly believed, if we can't hold on to Maple Leaf Castle, everyone will die. Judging the situation, Cecilia still has the basic skills of a noble, otherwise she wouldn't have risked her own safety to rescue civilians all the way. These civilians are all combat ready in the face of natural disasters, even with a farming tool, they can at least surround and kill a dead soul. The two chatted for less than 5 minutes, and the situation of Anwen's battle over there became increasingly clear. The silver light kept cutting into the body of the corpse demon, while its attack became slower and slower. After all, it's not a game. Corpse monsters don't have monster panels, and only players have strange settings like being able to maintain mobility when injured. As the long sword fell, the attack of the corpse demon was once again bounced away, and the opponent's stiffening time exceeded the initial time. The dead energy on their body also gathered inside, and they were already at the end of their strength. Anwen's sword, devoid of any emotion, crossed the opponent's neck, and Doda's head fell to the ground. The deep purple soul fire in his eyes gradually dimmed. Obtain 2,000 soul points, grasping the long sword dropped by the opponent, and Wenwen wanted to explore its attributes, but found that the sword had decayed with the wind and disappeared into ashes. What? Where are Laozi's spoils of war? Anwen looked at the remaining sword hilt in his hand and casually shook it off with a black line on his face at Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. Are you playing like this? A good boutique corruption sword, have you swallowed it for me? Reality is indeed a garbage game. Not at all humanized. With an unhappy mood, Anwen walked to the side of the mansion and opened the door of the cellar. Standing at the door shouting, "Selik! Hurry up and get out of your mouse hole." And Drake. Surprise cries came from the cellar. "You're here to save me." After a moment, a chubby guy crawled out of the cellar with agility different from his body. He had a disheveled face, his blonde hair covered in gray dust, but his gaze was full of emotion, his eyes fixed on Anwen. "Good brother. You actually came to save me." Selik reached out to embrace Anwen, but was pushed away by disgust. "Who is your good brother?" Anwen said angrily, "You are a star-level alchemist, with a constant spell position or a flame-breathing spell, yet you are shrinking in the cellar. I don't have such a shameful cousin." Torin Drake's wife, also known as Anwen's mother, is the legitimate daughter of the Sanders family. And the child born to the mother's sister was this Selik Sanders. A true star-level alchemist, a cowardly egg in the eyes of beta testers. After defeating the corpse demon on the second branch, we also need to escort this alchemist back to Maple Leaf Castle. This alchemist runs away as soon as he hears the wind, making it much more difficult to take him than to kill the undead and defeat the boss. Taking advantage of the reality and the relationship between Anwen and Selik in the plot background, we can finally face this guy well and spit out a player's bad joke.